Welcome, everybody. Delighted to have you all here with us here for today's Medical Alley webinar titled How AI-Ready MedTech Teams Deliver Early, Often, and Still Pass Audits. My name is Ben Wagner. I'm the Director of Communications here at Medical Alley. Delighted to be your host for today's conversation. Before we get started, I do want to extend a special thank you to the gentleman on your screen and to their organization, AgilityIRL, for making today's webinar possible. Their team has been an incredible resource to the community really for more than a decade, helping organizations modernize the way they develop complex software-enabled technologies while maintaining the quality and compliance that industries across Medical Alley really demand. So I don't have to say this. I don't think this is any surprise to anybody, but each of you know the pressure on MedTech organizations really has never felt greater. Teams are expected to innovate faster, integrate AI into their products, respond to customer needs, and of course, meet the rigorous standards that are required by regulators from around the world. The good news, though, and what you'll find here from today's conversation, is that speed and compliance don't necessarily have to be competing priorities. Over the next hour or so, we'll explore how MedTech organizations are moving sort of beyond traditional development models by embedding quality, regulatory testing, and risk management activities throughout the product lifecycle rather than delaying them until the end. So with that, I am pleased to welcome today's panelists or experts with us here today. First is Jeff Lee, a partner at AgilityIRL, where he focuses on coaching at team and leadership levels, as well as training individuals and organizations. Jeff has worked with a number of the health and life sciences organizations that we are all familiar with across the Medical Alley community. Excited to have him with us here today. Also with us is Patrick Campbell, also a partner at AgilityIRL, whose career spans more than 25 years spearheading aggressive and effective agile transformations for medium to large organizations. I will let Patrick and Jeff introduce themselves in a bit more detail here in just a moment. But first, I do want to bring the audience in on a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so you will get a link to this conversation afterward if you would like to rewatch it or to share it with a colleague. We certainly encourage you to do that if you found this content really helpful for you. And as questions come up, go ahead and drop them into the Q&A box there at the bottom of your screen. We'll have questions and we'll have time to answer those for Jeff and for Patrick toward the end of today's discussion. And also a note, we've also have a few poll questions for you here today and would love to have your input and to help sort of shape the discussion really as we move forward. So you'll see those sort of throughout the conversation here with Patrick and Jeff. So with that, gentlemen, appreciate your time here today. Really appreciate your insight and your leadership really in this community. Excited for this conversation. Before we begin, would love it if each of you would be willing to tell us a little bit more about yourselves, what you do and why you do it. And Jeff, I will pass the baton off to you here first.
All right, thanks, Ben, and thanks for having us here. Thanks everyone for joining. So I've been in the software development world for a long time, and the first time I moved into agile iterative ways of working was actually at a large medical device company. And so I got to learn right away the conflicts that between some internal processes and what the agile people thought we could be able to do, right? Especially in software, but it also extends to other parts of product development. And obviously in the Twin Cities area where Pat and I both live, we have a lot of medical device companies. We've really focused AgilityIRL on supporting those companies. And as you'll hear as we get into the conversation today, help them to deliver more iteratively, help them to meet compliance iteratively as well as we're going and build better products as we go. And so through our journey, and Pat and I have worked together at medical device companies, we find that there's lots of opportunities there. And hopefully those of you who are joining us today can see that as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Pat.
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, Ben. Thanks for having us, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I've been in the technology space my entire career. The first part of it with a large organization you may have heard of, HP, leading the development and deployment of large systems, and grew increasingly frustrated with how that was working or not working. More was the case. So once I parted ways and discovered Agile, have really enjoyed helping companies adopt and implement that. And as Jeff outlined, our company has evolved to really focus in this space where med device companies that are doing, cutting edge work in the health space really needed some guidance and support in how do we do both? Because it is possible, and we're going to talk about that today. So looking forward to it, and I guess we can pass it back to you, Ben, to get us going.
Yeah, sounds good, Pat. Jeff, thank you. I mentioned there were going to be a few poll questions, and why don't we just start off with question number one here. So, kind of thinking really high level, what are some of the biggest obstacles preventing your organization from delivering software-enabled products faster? You got choices here up on your screen: regulatory and compliance concerns, quality and testing happening too late, cross-functional coordination and dependencies, unclear priorities or changing requirements, and legacy processes and ways of working. So just a couple of, just a high-level question really to get us started as some of our responses start to come in. And thinking about this too for our attendees, if you have a question maybe related to some of these poll questions, again, put those into the chat or into the Q&A box, and that will that's something we can certainly discuss here throughout today's conversation.
Yeah, I imagine some of the questions right now are, why can't I select multiple?
Yeah, I suppose that's true. And if you have, thinking of maybe the top one, but it does look like, as I'm starting to see some of the results come in, there isn't exactly a clear winner thus far. So I'll wait just another, maybe a couple of seconds here, allowing some other folks to answer. But it does seem like all of these are really top of mind for our attendees as well this morning. So, I'll just I'll end that, and we'll share the results here quickly. So, yeah, even split, Jeff and Patrick, across regulatory compliance concerns, cross-functional coordination and dependencies, and really unclear priorities and changing requirements. So I guess as you look at that, knowing that probably all of these probably can fit as an obstacle, what are your initial thoughts? Jeff, I'll kind of kick it off to you to start.
Yeah, I think, not surprising to see the regulatory and compliance rise to the top there. We do see that a lot. And especially when regulatory and compliance happen at the end, right? It's the thing that's stopping us from getting released. And so I certainly have been, seen organizations feeling that pain. Yeah, cross-functional coordination, I mean, that's foundational. We'll be getting into that today as far as how you can help make that better. But when you have different groups who are all part of getting a product delivered, who are working in different silos, huge problem, huge problem. I don't know. What do you think about, Pat?
So the interesting thing about these is these tend to be reflective of symptoms of the problem when they all point back to what we find are underlying system issues. And that's where we spend a lot of our focus when we work with our clients. Bottlenecks and prioritization, cross-functional handoffs, things like that. The good news is that most of these problems are solvable without replacing your QMS or reorganizing your entire company. So there is good news there.
Well, I think this fits really nicely into the first question that I've got for the both of you, which is, starting big picture, is it possible to move faster without increasing your regulatory risk? And if so, really, what do you see as, what separates the organizations that are succeeding from those who are maybe struggling with that balance? Patrick, I'll start it off with you.
Yeah, the misconception is that speed comes from doing less quality, which is obviously a big worry for all companies in this space. Where in reality, speed really comes from finding problems sooner in your process. And the difference between organizations is the ones that struggle, they tend to discover those issues, documentation gaps, risk concerns at the end of the product development cycle. Where the ones that succeed, they're the ones that are surfacing those issues continuously. Jeff, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, so for me, if you'll indulge me with a metaphor for a minute, I think of going faster doesn't just mean going faster, right? It doesn't mean what are we trying to get to faster? And it's trying to reach a goal faster, and that goal in medical device companies is often a submission. And so the metaphor I like to think about is, we live in Minnesota. We're the land of 10,000 lakes, 11,000 something, if you want to be precise. And if you imagine you're going to swim across the lake, right? You see a tree over there, that's my destination. I'm going to go swim at that tree. And you've got your manager over your shoulder saying, get there as fast as you can, right? Well, we don't want people just to put their head down in the water and move their body as fast as they can. Obviously, they're going to tire out, but they're probably going to be going the wrong direction. So getting there fast means that we are stopping, we're checking, we're looking up. Are we still going in the right direction? We're listening, understanding what's changed, right? We don't have a lot of currents in our lakes, but we could get some winds. That might blow us off course a little bit. And so stopping and pausing and making sure we're going the right way and being aware that that destination might change, right? And so there's a lot of things I think that med device kind of work into that abstract metaphor, but it's not about just doing what we do faster. It's about making sure we're heading the right direction and putting the checks in our process continually to evaluate that.
Jeff, what do you think of the phrase that kind of gets thrown around a lot of like move fast and break things?
I think it works great for some tech companies that don't have
Yeah.
regulations.
Yeah.
You can do that. Obviously, you can't do that with a release that when people's health is in question. However, you can move if you got the right quality controls in your environment. You can do that, to experiment with things, understanding
Hmm.
what's working, what's not. The breaking things is cool as long as you have a good testing strategy and testing implementation, so when things are breaking. You can make some conscious decisions there.
Yep. You just need to break them earlier. And so the goal isn't fewer controls, it's earlier controls um, as guardrails.
Yeah, that's a good distinction there. That just kind of popped up into my mind as you talked about moving faster, but really with purpose and with
Yeah.
intention. So, well, one of the themes I think we'll keep coming back today really is embedding quality and compliance into development. Patrick, you kind of just touched on that earlier upstream. Um, it's a phrase that we hear often, but Patrick, what does that look like in practice to you?
So in practice, what that really means, Ben, is that quality and regulatory, they shouldn't be departments that review work after the development is done. They should be actively participating in the development throughout the process. And this is where we find, a lot of struggle in the organizations we work with. Risk discussions, they have to happen while requirements are being created. Verification planning happens while features are designed, and traceability is maintained as the work progresses. And so the phrase we often use is we're trying to build quality in rather than inspect quality in.
Oh, interesting. So, Jeff, in your opinion, what do you think changes really when quality and regulatory they move from really being sort of gatekeepers at the end of the process to being sort of that active participant throughout?
Yeah. So one thing is they're a lot happier, right? You think I have a lot of sympathy for, name your department, but quality, regulatory, cyber, like there's a bunch of them who in most organizations, they don't know what's going on with the new work until they are the gate to get it released, right? And that's not a fun place to be. So getting into the teams and being part of the work as it's done, number one, they're able to give contributions when it's low risk and it's low effort to review them. They're happier, the teams are happier, the development teams are happier because often they aren't, it's not the feedback that they get from quality or cyber whomever at the end of a project that really bothers them. It's the timing. And so getting that feedback earlier where it's less costly is really important.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I know many people don't necessarily assume agile and FDA compliance belong in the same sentence. How do you, Jeff, help organizations adopt um, iterative development approaches while still satisfying those really important FDA and ISO requirements?
Mhm. Yeah, the first thing is just it's cultural in a company, right? And getting everybody to be able to say the sentence that um, documentation is part of our product, right? All these things that we're doing often at the end, they're part of the product. And if we want to know that our product is done at various stages throughout, at least with what we've been working on, the documentation has to be there. The reviews have to be there. And so the way you functionally do this is you get people who are doing reviews of documentation. They're on the teams all the time. And for people who are familiar with agile processes, if you are running a sprint, which is just a short period of time where you're doing work, whether that's 2 weeks or a month or whatever it is, that sprint's not done without doing the documentation and getting some sort of review. It might be an informal review, but you're getting that feedback throughout.
Okay. Patrick, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to say, a lot of people think FDA requires waterfall, which is a misconception. What FDA is looking for is evidence, controls, traceability, those kind of things, none of which are actually incompatible with Agile. In fact, the iterative development approach that Agile supports actually creates better visibility when done well. Because if you're doing it in smaller increments, the way Jeff described, you're going to get earlier testing, which means earlier feedback, which means lower risk. And there's actually some guidance from AAMI called TIR45 that actually helps establish that Agile and regulated development can absolutely coexist. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
important to note that that guidance, it was, done with industry and FDA working together to figure out how this works. And it's not brand new. This was in the first decade of the 2000s when TIR45 was initially released, recently updated as well. But fundamentally, the principles still hold from the original version, which is almost 20 years old.
Interesting. I wonder if either of you has I wouldn't ask you to name names of companies or anything like that, but any kind of a case study that you can think of where, this has played out to where all of these teams have been brought in more at the end as gatekeepers, and what maybe were some of the consequences of that situation. And I'm putting you both on the spot here, but is there a case study you can think of that you might be able to share with our group today?
Yeah,
well,
Pat, I
that's
think
great.
you're, yeah, go ahead. I'm going to toss
Yeah.
it over to you because I know your client you've been working with for a bit is a great one for this.
Well, we have a client that I'm still working with, and they've actually impacted their process. It started off they were spending upwards of 25 to 30 weeks after development, just pulling together the documentation for submission, making sure all the T's were crossed, I's were dotted. Since they made some of these changes, they've actually gotten that down as low as 8 weeks, and they're pretty excited. In fact, they've got a vision to even cut that in half. So they now see what can happen when they're doing continuous compliance as opposed to leaving it towards the end.
Yeah, and I want
And
to tie it back, Ben, to your question about that you started with as far as speed, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that we're doing when we are, requiring, and I don't say that we are requiring, when companies are changing their process so that they create the documentation, they review the documentation in those short intervals of time, right? Every 2 weeks, we're updating documentation and reviewing it. That slows things down, right? They are writing less code if they're doing software in those 2 weeks because they're having to do some other things as well. But it's helping them achieve their goals faster. Really, it's, I'm not gonna be surprising people on this call at that, end of project tail where you have to get the V and V done and everything signed and reviewed. That's often, 30% of your overall development time, sometime more. So if you can cut that down significantly, like Pat talked away about from, close to 30 weeks to 8 weeks, that's a huge change. And going a little bit slower, sprint to sprint, it's going to help you out.
Yeah, that's a really a significant cut in time, Pat, and especially if you're talking about cutting that down even more to a shorter amount of time is um, can have huge impacts on business too. So Okay, well, that brings us really, I think, to our next poll question here, which I will throw up on our screen here, uh, which activity causes the most pain during audit preparation or regulatory submission? Um, First, first one in is pulling everything together at the last minute. That's one of the options there, as well as traceability documentation, risk management documentation, verification and validation evidence requirements, changes and change history, and then as well as kind of that last minute option there too. So while we've got our attendees answering that question. Gentlemen, I can pose another question to you while the responses come in. Starting with traceability, requirements change constantly in modern development environments. How do you see organizations maintaining traceability without creating an overwhelming documentation burden? Pat, I'll start with you on that question.
Well, it again starts with doing that in smaller increments and recognizing that it's actually part of product development. Is that traceability, and it's not negotiable. So the key is how do we set up our processes on a day-to-day basis in our development to ensure that the traceability is always being addressed.
Yeah, one thing I've run into as a program manager working on med device, and really it was software, but getting to the end of the project, right? We had a requirements document that was signed off 6 months prior. We got to the end of the project, and then we had to go back and say, what did we actually build, right? We didn't have those checkpoints throughout to say, let's review our requirements and make sure that we're addressing all these things. And so it was like this huge, very disruptive, maybe week-long effort to reconcile our original requirements document with what we actually built, right? If you're just building that as you go and keeping it always reconciled and done, it would have been so much better. And really, it's not that much work if you keep it up to date.
Yeah. Basically, you're making a byproduct of the work that's already happening.
So we've got results in here too. Traceability documentation definitely was one of the top choices there, but looks like the majority was pulling everything together at the last minute, along with verification and validation evidence was also kind of among the top choices selected there too. So any surprises that was kind of the top choice?
That's what we see the most, isn't it, Jeff?
Yeah, and I would say that last minute, right, can turn into 6 months, right, as we talked about before. But at the end, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, appreciate everybody for jumping in to answer these questions here too. Just helps kind of shape the conversation a little bit here too. So, risk management is also another area that often remains separate from day-to-day development. How should organizations be thinking about integrating ISO risk management into an iterative development model? And Jeff, I'll come back to you for that question.
Yeah, I think number one is think about who's responsible for risk management. I think for a lot of companies, it's looking at the regulatory people. That's their job. And so fundamentally, again, it's kind of changing the culture and making everyone responsible for that. Everything you develop, everything, all the work that's done throughout, you should be looking at it to say, okay, what does this do to risk? Should we add this to the log? Do we need to adjust something that's on the log? So, don't think of risk management as a documentation exercise. Think of it as an ongoing part of your process.
Yeah, it shouldn't happen at once. It should evolve because your new requirements will create new risks. So you need to assess it when you're identifying new requirements. Any design changes, they'll affect existing risk. And as you get customer feedback, it can reveal emerging risk. And so it's a continuous process, much like the traceability we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. You mentioned, continuous process. It's it really kind of brings us to a phrase we hear a lot, continuous compliance, and it's been touched on certainly in this conversation. I wonder if you both might be able to touch on what does continuous compliance actually look like in practice day to day for these organizations.
Well, it's really pretty straightforward, and when we help clients modify how they're doing this, it means all the evidence is created as the work happens and captured. Your documentation, your traceability, your risk files, they're all evolving and accumulating as you go. But that's sometimes a cultural change, which is difficult, and that's where we really work hard with companies to get over that hump. Jeff, what would you add?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we mentioned TIR45 before, and one thing that is in there is the sum of the parts
Hmm.
model for review and compliance. And the idea is for every little change that you make, you review that, right? And you're reviewing these little things. You're not, a lot of companies, have a formal process to release a document and get it signed off for their DHF, and we're not talking about that. We're talking about little bits of review, but then when it comes time to, review that whole document at the end, that's the sum of the parts. We've reviewed all the little parts. We just need to do a review to make sure that these things holistically tie together. We don't need to do every little baby inspection at the end again. And so, having that continuous compliance again, it really cuts down that end of project tail.
What's
Mhm.
cool about that is that when an audit happens, then it becomes really a review of how you work rather than a scramble to prove what actually happened.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, we've got a question that's already come in really on AI and the potential for AI to make substantial improvements in development processes. So I want to let the person who asked that question know we see your question, and I think we want to probably get to AI a bit here as well, because I
Hmm.
think one of our next questions is for our audience is related to AI and the potential for AI to add value to product development and where we can see that. So I'm going to launch our third question here as well. So to that point, to our audience, where do you see which area of product development do you see having the greatest potential for AI assistance here today? Is it requirements analysis? Is it risk identification and assessment? Is it traceability management? Testing and verification activities or documentation generation. And I don't want our experts to sort of color the responses from our attendees, but I'm curious, Pat and Jeff, where do you see as we start to see the answers come in? Where do you see the kind of the greatest advances or possibilities for AI to assist in product development?
Jeff, I'm going to let you lead this one off.
All right, I'm putting my thumb on the scale here a little bit. Although you phrase it, I mean, the greatest advances, I'm not sure. I think the easiest advances that I'm seeing
Yeah.
right now are in the traceability. I'm seeing some of the tools that are recently released that can map your requirements to your, test, your results, to all these things have AI capabilities built in, and it's implementing a new tool is never an easy thing, but it's a relatively low lift to get a huge amount of value from a compliance perspective. And so I'm definitely seeing that as a change in the industry.
Okay. Interesting. Patrick, any agreement,
Yeah.
non-agreement there from you?
Oh, I definitely agree. In fact, there's an interesting dichotomy when you think about AI. There's AI augmentation where it's helping in the assistance of doing these kinds of things. And then there's AI transformation where you're actually transforming the way you develop product in the use by using AI. And I think we're going to touch on that a little bit more, but um, what we're talking about here in this question is probably more on the augmentation side, but the transformation side is really going to be exciting.
Well, Jeff, Pat, I hate to say it, but there wasn't the top answer was actually documentation generation from our audience.
Mhm.
And so, do you see value there? Do you see opportunities for growth there? Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, like Pat mentioned, right, that's the augmentation part. That's easy to do. I hope everyone is doing that right now. And if
Mhm.
not, you should start. There are any number of these kinds of webinars that you can go to for using AI for those kinds of things, and it's really a low lift to get going with some of the document generation.
Really?
Mhm.
Okay. Um, One of the questions that has come in kind of related to this topic, and I'll just bring it in now because I think it fits. The question really is, what areas have you seen companies use AI to make substantial improvements in their development processes? That's been maybe touched on a little bit, but also, how do we ensure that our use of AI does not violate FDA expectations? Jeff, would you,
I'll
or
take the
Pat? Yeah,
first half of that and then
great.
toss it over to Jeff because he's been doing some work in this area. But as that poll answer indicated, one of the biggest areas in helping in the development process has been on the documentation because that's been tedious in the past, and so that's one area for sure. Jeff, in terms of how we make sure it doesn't violate FDA expectations, you've been doing a little bit of work there.
Yeah, and if we're talking about development processes and we're not talking about AI released in the wild that's changing what your system does, after approval, right? Those are two different things. So I just want to make sure we're differentiating there. But as far as, before release in your development process, I think of that kind of like I think about Agile versus waterfall. The FDA has certain controls they want in your process, right? How you generate those controls doesn't matter a lot. So if you're using AI to create your documents, cool, but you can't say AI is accountable. So we, the people receiving paychecks in this company, aren't responsible. No, you are. You can't outsource it. AI is not an employee of your company, right? And so
Yeah.
you do have to have that human in the loop that you are accountable for what you give to the FDA that you produce. You can't just say, yeah, we don't know what it says. It was the AI bot that did it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the same principle as any engineering artifact. You trust but verify. And so what AI generates, humans need to verify, decide, and remain accountable.
Well, and maybe to that point, let's maybe take a step up and just talk about companies that are AI ready, and what that actually means. When you think about an AI ready MedTech organization, Pat, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's AI ready is not about having Chat GPT or Claude licenses on which desks or Copilot. AI ready is really about having a system that can actually benefit from the implementation of AI, which means you're going to need clear workflows, good data, traceability and governance, all those things that are required, whether or not you're using AI, and quality processes that can actually absorb faster delivery and development. And then when you have those things, AI can act as a force multiplier. And that's what we mean when we talk about AI ready med device organizations.
Jeff, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, if I'm really leaning into this swimming across the lake analogy. By the way, I never swim across lakes, but again, if we want to superpower somebody swimming across the lake, we want to make sure we have the right process involved, right? The process of stopping and pausing and making sure we're heading toward the right goal. Because if we're just making them go faster in the wrong direction, that's exactly what you're going to get, and you're going to get more of a mess when you get to the end of a development effort. So, having that
Yeah.
right process, like Pat talked about, is key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you going to be multiplying effectiveness? And, we were talking about a force multiplier. You're going to be multiplying effectiveness or multiplying dysfunction. So you have to be careful there.
Mhm.
And before you accelerate your system, make sure you understand the system of product development that you're actually running.
And that gets at a kind of a broader issue I hear with AI a lot, which is, good in, good out, bad in, bad out, right? The AI, these algorithms are as good as the data that you and the
Mhm.
processes that you input into them. It sounds like that's true in this case as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, it's like any engineering artifact, trust, but make sure you verify that what's coming out is what you're looking for and what you
And
need.
Jeff, you mentioned that you really see the greatest or like the easiest value in AI in terms of traceability management. I wonder if you might be able to share a bit more about kind of your outlook there and where you see some easier or greater steps taking moving forward.
Yeah, one thing we haven't mentioned yet, right, is the FDA is really leaning into AI. I imagine people are aware of that. That's definitely been in the
Yeah.
news, and so your submissions are going to get an AI review. You might as well do that before you send them, right? And so, yeah, and there are tools. I'm not going to go on the record, naming any tools right now, but and we don't want to advertise for certain things, but pretty easy to find of the tools that are using AI to see, okay, where are we mapped? Where are you missing components in your traceability? And getting those, and they all interface, right? If you are using certain tools to track your development, all the tickets that your teams are pulling to go and write code or build a camera head or whatever you're doing. Those integrate pretty cleanly with the tools that have the AI and generation to see where your traceability is. And so getting those pieces of plumbing put together takes some time. That's not free, and sometimes it's not cheap, but huge value there.
We've got a couple of questions coming in kind of related to AI. I might save one for later, but there is one that I think could fit into this part of the conversation too, which is really about the common mistakes that you see medtech companies making when they're attempting to become more adaptive or AI enabled. I wonder if either of you have any examples of some mistakes that you see companies making as they try to roll out this technology or integrate it into their processes.
A
So,
few. In
yeah,
fact, we're going to go different directions. I'll start off. Um,
yeah, go ahead.
I
there's not
like
only
that. That's
one.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I've seen is a client I've worked with that is very conservative and nervous about where they're going with it. And so they decided to start by giving one senior director access to figure out what to do with AI. You know, smart senior director, smart person, hasn't done actual work. Sorry, senior directors, you don't do actual work, right? Um, but hasn't built something. How about that? Hasn't built something in a long time. Give it to the people who are building something. Let them play with it. Let them figure out what works. Of course, you need guardrails and make sure your security people are involved and you're not compromising your data and all that kind of stuff. But then give it to the people who are doing the work because they're going to come up with the interesting ideas.
Yeah. And then on the other side of that coin, if you will, be careful what you're automating with AI. We were just out at Device Talks in Boston, and Boston is a great city, great to visit, but their road system is really difficult. And the problem is that they simply paved over the cow paths that were originally there from the founding of
Yep.
the city.
Yep.
And the same thing could happen with a med device company is that they're not taking a look at the system of product development before they apply AI every step of the way.
I really appreciate the metaphors being used because I think these are really clear images. Swimming across the lake, the roads in Boston. I think that's actually very helpful. So, thinking about um, Pat, something you mentioned, making sure humans are in the loop and validating the data. How should organizations be validating AI generated outputs, especially in a regulated environment? And how do you make sure that you keep humans kind of firmly in the loop on these decisions that are being made or the outputs of AI?
Well, when we're doing product development in this space, we already have humans reviewing what humans are doing. You're looking for non-involved engineers to do a review of a design or to do an implementation of code. The same should be true of anything generated by AI, is you should have a separate reviewer or team of reviewers reviewing the output and signing off on it. Like I mentioned earlier, humans need to verify and decide, is this going to work or not, and be accountable for that decision. In this environment of regulation, that's not an option.
Jeff, anything you might add there?
No, no, just echoing the whole thing, right? We are accountable. You are accountable as a
Yeah.
company, and the people are the accountable ones. So it has to be part of it. Yep, and now I said, no, I do have one thing to add, right? It's a lot of what we do when we go work with companies, we get people aligned on what is possible and what good looks like, right? So often we'll do that through training classes, whatever it is. Um, you need to be doing the same things here organizationally. Get a bunch of people in a room who are impacted, help them to understand or help them to collaborate and come up with the ideas on how you can go about doing this, because that alignment is huge and you can't do it by going off in pockets and hope that it just kind of permeates through the environment.
Mhm. Well, that brings us, I think, here to our final poll question for our audience as well. And this looks kind of overarching. We've talked a little bit about AI. We've talked about improving development processes. Here is kind of gets to the heart of that, which is if you could improve one outcome in your development process over the next 12 months, which would you choose? Is it faster time to market, better predictability, higher product quality, improved audit readiness, or less rework and firefighting? So I think interested to see kind of what the audience, what our attendees are really looking for, and where they might choose success over the next year or so. So as these results are starting to come in, um, Jeff, I'll pose this question to you. As you think about leaders are investing in modernization, how do they modernize their organizations? How should they be measuring success? In your view, what are some of the metrics really that matter?
Yeah, fundamentally, start with outcomes, right?
Okay.
Start with the end in mind. What do we want from a customer point of view? What means success for our customers, and back up from there. If you have a team that's able to release frequently, that helps, right? Because you're able to get that feedback more often. Obviously, in the med device space, we're often doing multi-year projects, and so we're able to get feedback on the stuff we've already released. Hopefully, we have built into our process the ability to incorporate that as we're building our next generation thing. But thinking about the, how quickly do we get things done if we're just focusing, within a development cycle? So, some of the terms, cycle time, lead time, are we able to get things complete with high quality? So what are the defects that we run into? Those kinds of things. And I know this is going to be hard. So, I was waterfall project manager for a good chunk of my career. I got my PMP. I learned that there is an iron triangle, scope, schedule, and cost, right? And that is ingrained in many of the organizations. That's not your most important metric. It's really not. Sorry, finance folks. Sorry, everyone who's leaning on that so much, but it's the other things, and you need to be flexible with some of the is scope really our most important thing, or is it hitting a date and getting this stuff out? So a lot of trade-offs there. I think they need to get out of the traditional kind of metrics, traditional project metrics especially, and think about value.
Um, I have got the results here from the poll, and it does again look fairly split. Jeff, you just talked about faster time to market. That was the number one choice, but also better predictability and less rework and firefighting were among sort of the top choices from our attendees. So, um, you know, Pat, does it surprise you that there are competing priorities? I don't imagine it would, or competing improvements in outcomes over the next 12 months. What are your thoughts as you look at the results here?
No, this is typical. I mean, all companies are looking for some aspect of most of these. The good news is that the kinds of um, teaching and coaching we do affect all of these. What we try to do, though, is make sure the company leadership has prioritized which one or two are they most focused on before we start to identify, okay, if that's the case, this is what we need to do next, and this is where you currently stand. So not a surprise at all. And you know, the good news is that we've had an impact on all of these in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, one thing when I look at these and think about we're asking people to choose which one's most important, but what you've been hearing for the last 45 minutes is they all come together if you create a system that supports it,
Hmm.
right? That you're going to get to your goals faster, you're going to be more predictable, less firefighting if you're doing these compliance activities all the time.
Yeah.
Right, right. And that was kind of the next natural question, which is really what do teams need to be doing then, given that these are the focus areas over the next 12 months, what do teams need to be doing now to achieve some of these goals? Jeff, I wonder if I might start with you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and you asked about teams, but just kind of thinking about companies and environments, is let's not focus on the teams. Let's focus on the system. And that starts out with the quality management system. So, does your quality management system preclude you from doing some of the things that we're talking about? Can you take credit for testing, before the end of a big project? Can you do those reviews? Do you have to sequence sign-offs and all those kinds of things? Um, a lot of times, and honestly, you can do a number of these things and just not take credit for them without changing your quality management system. But for true culture change, for truly, fundamentally working in a different way, you also need to look at that quality management system and tune it for agile delivery as well.
Yeah, I would add, you've got typically in these types of organizations, you've got a lot of different silos trying to work together on this product development. And so, to Jeff's point, you have to really rethink what it means to be a team as opposed to a group of silos. We need to get to where there's less handoff, there's more collaboration, uh, less optimization of departments, and more optimization of the product development flow, and then shared ownership for outcomes that we were talking about measuring for quality and for the risk. And instead of asking, whose responsibility is this part, start talking about how do we solve this together. And
Yeah.
uh, and so teams really need to get to that point where they can do that.
For the leaders listening in who maybe have begun this process to really modernize their systems, what are some signs that they may be that an effort may be heading off track? Like, what are maybe some things to look for that as they begin to roll out some of these new some new ways of working? What are some ways to tell that this isn't quite working? What should they be on the lookout for?
I think one of the
Jeff, you
things to
may.
be on the lookout for not hearing about problems. If you're not
Mm,
hearing about problems, it's not working, right? When
yeah.
you go through one of these initiatives, fundamentally, what you're getting in your organization is transparency. And you should be hearing about things that you didn't used to hear about. It doesn't mean that they're new. It just means you didn't used to hear about them. So as you go through these things, you see the friction. It becomes apparent to people. You see the bottlenecks, and then traditionally people look to solve the one that's most painful, that's most obvious, and then you find about the next one that's bothering you. And that's normal. That's expected. You should see those kind of friction and problems emerge, and if you don't, something's not working.
Pat, anything you
Yeah,
might add?
I would add to that, if you're leaving quality and regulatory out of the conversation, uh, then you've got a problem. If you're focusing on tools versus operating models, you've got an issue there. If you're trying to scale up before you've got the fundamentals figured out, you got a problem there. And 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 finally and increasingly, if you're kind of going along with the tools comment, if you're blindly implementing AI before understanding how ready you are to do it, then you've got a challenge.
We've got a couple of questions. I've got a couple of questions left here too, but I just want to remind our attendees to put the questions they have into that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll have just a few minutes here to answer those here for Jeff and for Pat. But kind of as we start to close, gentlemen, um, for organizations that are listening here today and they are saying to themselves, we know we need to evolve, but I don't exactly know where to begin. Where do you see as the first step that they should take in the next 90 days to begin that process? Pat, I
Uh,
might start with you.
Well, I would start with figuring out where you currently are, assessing where you're at, get a baseline, understand, what are the current workflows and capabilities, where are the bottlenecks, where quality and compliance activities are happening, and then pick one area, one value stream or product area, and start running some focused experiments. And then based on those experiments, learn, adjust, expand, and improve. And don't try to change everything at once. Jeff, your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of going on the same vein there. Understand what's currently going on. Get some recordings, write down some numbers. How many weeks did it take you from development complete to release in your last big project? Because what generally happens is companies go in and we do this even in our personal lives when we make changes and we forget about where things used to be because we've evolved to a certain point and all we can see is the problems that are ahead of us. And it's good to be able to say where you've come already in addition to just being able to say where do we need to go. Yeah, and I wouldn't tell anyone not to reach out to Agility IRL to help with that. We'd be more than happy.
I was waiting for that actually. I was like, well, that's the obvious answer, right? No, it goes back to the old cliche, right? You can't manage what you don't measure, and so that sounds like that
Mhm.
first step, at least understanding where you are as a baseline.
Well
I think,
said. Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, and again, this is self-serving, but it does help to have an outside point of view, right? Because you've been swimming in, here I am swimming in the water again, for so long, and you don't see the water, right? And so it's having an outside viewpoint can really help you understand where you need to move.
Well, I've got one final question here. We'll call it a lightning round, but it's really just one question for the two of you before we get into the Q&A. It looks like we've got one question in here now, so I'd encourage our attendees to throw some questions in there as well. But in one sentence, or at least in a couple of sentences, what do you feel will separate medtech organizations that thrive over the next decade from those that struggle to keep pace? Pat, I'll start with you.
Well, in one sentence, okay.
Well, a
The
couple of sentences. I'm not counting here.
Ben, I think the winners in this space are not the ones with the most process or the most AI or whatever. They're going to be the ones that learn fastest, adapt fastest, and figure out how to build that quality into everything they do every step of the way. If I had to put it in a nutshell, that's probably what I would do.
That's pretty good. Jeff, your thoughts?
Yeah, speed to market, right? Getting things out there because the barriers to entry are going down quite a bit with modern technologies. The speed that different people are innovating is crazy. It's unbelievable what's going on in this industry right now with the rate of innovation, and it's the companies that can get their ideas out there first and then learn from it and iterate before the competition can that wins.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, Pat, I really appreciate your time here throughout this hour for this conversation. I think definitely illuminating, as both of you had some great metaphors too as well, but really appreciate the insight and the expertise you brought to the conversation here today. We've got a question in that's a little bit broader, kind of related to AI, and they're asking really about how much of the AI hype you believe is real related to healthcare. Is it, in your view, a true value add, or do companies want to appear ahead of the curve? I guess, your thoughts generally on AI's impact in healthcare and where maybe you see the future.
I don't think we can overstate how impactful it already is and it will continue to be.
Yeah.
Yes, there's hype. Yes, companies want to say that everything's AI enabled. here's my AI enabled pen, right? I mean, we're seeing stuff like that. But like the innovation that's going on, I saw a thing not too long ago. I think it was pancreatic cancer can be detected years earlier with a new kind of scan that was done using AI. I mean, there's so many examples out there, things that are already out there, and it's only going to increase.
Pat, any thoughts from you?
It's much like any innovation we've seen in the marketplace. I mean, it used to be the internet. Before that, it was desktop machines. There is a lot of hype at the first wave, and then things kind of go quiet. But in that quiet period, a lot of companies end up are doing the hard work figuring out how to integrate it into their approach, and then you really start to see things happen. We're already seeing some of the innovations that Jeff alluded to that are kind of mind-boggling. We're going to see more and more of those, but you can't you can't avoid the hype too because there's a lot of excitement around it.
Yeah. Well, I think a good place to leave it there too. So, Jeff, Pat, I really appreciate your time. I will echo your call out to companies who are looking to maybe take that next step in modernizing and evolving in their business to reach out to the two of you, to the team at AgilityIRL, to start that conversation. So, again, appreciate your time. Really appreciate your insights here today. And thank you to everybody for tuning into this Medical Alley webinar. And appreciate you being with us here today. Another reminder, we have been recording today, so if you've been writing notes down or you want to take another listen back, we'll send that out to you as well too. So, but finally, Jeff, Patrick, thank you once again.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Ben.
Thank you, Ben, and thanks everybody. Have a
All
great
right.
day.
Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.